1, 2, 1, 2. Yep, good. Thanks, Raquel, and many thanks to Frank for the invite. I feel very much at home with a mic in my hand. It makes me feel like it's a DJ gig, so it's just one of my little idiosyncrasies. I've got a few others as well, little strange mannerisms. But welcome back, everyone, and I've got to say that Johan's talk this morning was absolutely awesome and truly mind-blowing, and it's a very high standard for myself to kind of measure up to. So I've definitely got my work cut out here, but I will do my best. This talk, as you've seen, is titled Free Will Consciousness, Consent, and the Corporate Music Industry. And at first, you might think that these different elements are wildly unconnected and have about as much in common as politicians and truth and integrity, i.e. not a whole lot. But everything is ultimately connected, and I'm going to try and show in this talk how these different components do actually all fit together. I'm in the process of writing a book at the moment. I'm very close to finishing it. I think in about another 2 or 3 weeks I'll have all the writing done, and I've been on that for the past year. It's been a bit of a labour of love, you might say, and it's going to be quite a book. It's going to be about 200,000 words. It's not going to be a quick read. And it's bringing together all the things that I've come to understand about the ways in which the mainstream corporate music industry and the wider entertainment industry, incorporating Hollywood movies and television and all the rest of it, are manipulated by the hidden hand, so to speak. And there's all manner of things going on behind the scenes, beneath the surface gloss, that the general public doesn't get to see. And I'm trying to show in the book how the music industry is used for mind control, social engineering purposes, and a whole lot more besides. So there's going to be stuff in there about mind-controlled artists, for instance, the use of MK Ultra and Monarch programming on some of your favourite A-list artists. There's stuff in there on, well, we couldn't leave out demonic possession and ritual sacrifice. You know, it's a nice family-friendly read, so we had to get those in there. Dark occult symbolism that goes into music videos and record sleeves and that sort of thing. The transhumanist agenda, artificial intelligence, and how that's connected to the sort of music that is getting put out there now, and what's being done with sound frequencies and sound production, that sort of thing. I'm going right back to the early days of the UK and US industries as well, and showing how, from the very start, these industries were built on a background steeped in military intelligence. The CIA, MI6, various other organizations all had a hand in some of the very earliest superstars and groups that were put out there from the 1960s onwards. So all of that is coming up in the book. And during the course of writing it, I came to some other understandings as well about some eternal, universal principles and concepts which are kind of esoteric and metaphysical in nature. And that's where we get into free will consciousness, consenting, contracting, and also natural law, which goes under many different names, but the principle is always the same. So we're going to be touching on all of those as we progress. 5 years ago this month, September 2010, I woke up, so to speak. I've been a DJ for the past 25 years, as you heard, and for the first 20, I just pretty much went through the motions, did what was expected of a DJ, went around playing the tunes. I was fortunate enough to travel to many different countries. I did radio as well, and I was a magazine journalist. And I didn't really give any thought to what it was I was doing in terms of promoting and exposing this sort of music. But 5 years ago, I had the opportunity to do a lot of reading and a lot of musing and reflecting on different things. And I came to the realization that this world is nothing like we thought it was, which is a bit of an understatement, you might say. And I also came to realize that the world is not controlled and run by the people and the institutions that we're told it is. The truth is very, very different. In actual fact, there are various organizations and groups working through secret society networks that over a vast period of time have come to control and manipulate pretty much every aspect of daily human life. And that absolutely includes the entertainment industry and my special area of interest, which is the music industry. And one of the earliest things that alerted me to the fact that there was more to know about what's going on in the music game was the proliferation of symbols and imagery that was getting inserted into the work of various A-list artists. One of the best examples would be this pyramid symbol, which we see time and time again cropping up in music videos, record sleeves, promo shots, that sort of thing. This is dating back to 1985, 30 years ago. It's Madonna in the movie Desperately Seeking Susan, and on the back of her jacket we have the pyramid symbol with a capstone and an illuminated capstone with an all-seeing eye in the center of it. That image is a bit dark, but that's what it is. And isn't it interesting that we saw that symbol crop up in Johann's talk as representing the element of air? It has many other connotations. You're doubtless aware of the fact that the pyramid appears on the back of the US dollar bill with the removed capstone and the all-seeing eye. And you might ask yourself, what connection could an esoteric symbol like that have to the entertainment industry, to a pop artist like Madonna? Which is a very good question to ask. And we're seeing these symbols all over the place, bringing it more up to date. Here's this kind of triangular pyramid symbol being evoked by Jay-Z. There's lots to say about Jay-Z. There's a lot about him in the book, but we'll be here till about 8 o'clock if I start to go into it now. But suffice to say, this is a symbol that you see Jay-Z flashing up all the time, or he used to. And he refers to it as the rock sign. All these symbols come with an innocent-sounding cover story to explain what they are. And Jay-Z will tell you that this is the rock sign, and it's representative of his record label, which, when it first came out, was called Rockefeller Records. There's a name to conjure with. These days, it's morphed into Rock Nation, but the idea behind this symbol is that it represents the bling culture of hip-hop. It's supposed to be a diamond shape, and he's celebrating, you know, the success of his record label and all the rest of it. Jay-Z, in an interview in 2009, claimed to have invented this symbol. But when you look into it, you realize that's not the case. This symbol goes way back into antiquity. It's been used by many different civilizations in many parts of the world. You've seen it used by the Church of Satan, for instance. It's been used by Aleister Crowley in many of his dark occult secret societies, the OTO and the AA and all the rest of it. Very far from a modern symbol. Here he is with his best mate Kanye West doing the same thing. You come to realize there's more than meets the eye here. And again, the question arises, why should these esoteric symbols have any connection to the modern music industry? Talking of the Church of Satan, here's the founding priest of that organization, Anton Sandor LaVey, doing that very same sign. So straight away we see it goes back a little bit further than 2009. This would have been sometime in the 1960s. Another symbol that seems to be a favorite of these A-list artists is this one that you make with your thumb and fingers. And the cover story for it is that it means, okay, everything's cool, everything's fine. And you see politicians doing this, you see all manner of celebrities doing it. But of course, there's always a different explanation as to what these symbols mean. And when you really get into it and you study the occult nature of it, you realize that this is a depiction of a 6. And when you've got the 3 fingers raised at the top there, it's kind of denoting that it's 6 to the power of 3 or 3 sixes. So it's a depiction of 666, the number of the beast in the book of Revelation, and so many other dark occult connotations as well. 666 crops up a lot in this story. Why are these artists doing it? And they're not the only ones. As I mentioned, politicians seem to be rather fond of it as well. There's all your favourite ones up there, Rogues Gallery, It's like a nightmare episode of Celebrity Squares, isn't it? Your worst nightmare. And there it is, 666. And that particular number crops up somewhere else in the modern music story as well. Dr. Dre, the hip-hop artist and producer, formerly of NWA, who's enjoyed a highly successful solo career since, and is consistently named as one of the richest individuals in hip-hop. It's worth millions, if not billions now, and much of it has come as a result of his headphone range called Beats by Dre. And it's just a coincidence that Beats is an anagram of beast. We won't go there just now. But one of the symbols for Beats by Dre, the logo, is this symbol here, which we're told is supposed to be a B for Beats. But it looks more like a 6 to me. And in one of the ads for Beats by Dre, you get the 3 6s being flashed up there. And when you look into some of the other stuff that Dr. Dre has been involved with over the years and what he represents, it's no surprise to find him associated with this number. It goes way back. Here's a young Michael Jackson flashing up that same symbol that we saw Beyoncé doing. And here's the first, but not the last, showing of the Beatles in this particular talk. And we've got 2 symbols for the price of 1 here. We've got Paul McCartney, or is it? We're going there too, don't worry. We will get there. I should say, Paul McCartney, doing the 6 thing, and John Lennon here flashing up the horned hand sign. He does it that way round in one picture, and he does it the other way around. See, I can't do it. I can't do these things. That's it. He does it that way round once, and then for good measure, you get him in another shot doing it that way round. And there's a cover story for this symbol as well. This one is supposed to mean I love you. It's supposed to be spelling out I love you in deaf sign language when you've got the thumb extended like this. I should learn to do these things. I just can't get it right. But in actual fact, again, when you do the research, you come to realize that these secret societies that control the entertainment industry, these dark occult networks, have this entity known as Baphomet, and often known by other names as well, this horned kind of demonic entity which they seem to revere for some reason. And they seem to want to kind of worship it. And they get their artists to throw up these symbols in a kind of homage to this entity that means so much to them. And so that's why you see so many artists throwing up the horned hand sign. There's a particularly sinister depiction of it here from Eminem. And again, politicians get in on the act. Is it just a coincidence that all this lot happen to be throwing up the same symbol? And are Hillary Clinton, Bush, Cheney and Obama the sort of people that you'd really expect to be telling everyone, I love you? Probably not. They might be saying I love you, but it'll be to something other than humans. And here's our old mate Anton LaVey again, showing that this symbol was another favoured one of the Church of Satan, doing exactly the same hand signal there. It's known as Il Mano Cornuto, the horned hand. And then we have another symbol which crops up time and time again, which is the depiction of one eye symbolism. It, according to which researchers' work you look at, it's taken to be a depiction of the same all-seeing eye that we see in the pyramid. It's taken to be a depiction of the pineal gland, the third eye, so-called, the portal to higher levels of consciousness. But either way, these many artists seem to feel the need to highlight one eye and communicate it to you. And there's pretty much every A-list artist of contemporary times that you can think of in this composite picture doing the one eye symbol. You could ask yourself why this is. It goes way beyond the realms of coincidence. There are actually people that will say, oh, it's just a coincidence, they're just trying to look cool, it's just a trendy thing to do. In all these cases, yeah, right. I think there's more than meets the eye, if you'll forgive the pun. We get it in videos as well, and this one was a classic. This is a composite picture of the video Die Young. It's a lovely song. It It basically gives you the sentiments that life is short and pointless, and we're all going to die young anyway, so we might as well go out and get laid and get party and get high, because that's all life is worth. Lovely song. Nice one to get your daughters to listen to. And we have symbolism to match the sentiments of the song. So in this particular video, we had an upside-down cross, the classic inversion of that sacred symbol, which is a tenet of Satanism, which reverses and inverts everything. Then we have a pentagram, which you might expect to have been inverted, actually, but they didn't get round to doing that one. And over here, the all-seeing eye at the top of the pyramid again. So 3 symbols for the price of 1. That was an absolute Illuminati symbol fest. That video was just ridiculous. And it's all aimed at the subconscious mind, below the threshold of conscious recognition. So these symbols go straight into the subconscious mind, largely of young people, children, teenagers. And the conscious mind is not aware of the fact that they've been placed there. So in all these cases, we have the control system that is running the show when it comes to the music industry, placing their little calling cards and their little clues in plain sight. They're letting you know who owns these artists, because their asses are owned, lock, stock and barrel. And there's a phrase that you often hear, which is, they've sold their souls for fame and fortune. And I would suggest that rather than that being a myth or a convenient kind of quip or phrase, there is a lot of truth to that statement. This is a still from Rihanna's Run This Town video. And it's one of many images which occurs during a split second. So again, it's aimed at the subconscious mind, which absorbs everything. It absorbs millions of pieces of information per second, which the conscious mind is not capable of recognizing and processing. The conscious mind just selects a few pieces of information that it needs out of the many millions that it takes in, and the rest lay deeply lodged within the subconscious, and they can be called upon at a later date and evoked and brought to the surface without the conscious mind being aware of it. So these images are always aimed at the subconscious, and for a split second you had this image of Rihanna seemingly turning into this kind of entity and just morphing into whatever that is. Again, it's a video which would be watched by kids. Rihanna's fan base is largely young girls, at the age of 8, 9, 10 upwards. Is this appropriate stuff for them to be absorbing? Probably not, but it's there anyway. And here's another still from a Rihanna video. This one is from her song Umbrella, and it appears to be a pose where she's bending down, outstretching her arms, putting her head down. But when you study the dynamics of what's going on here, you realize that this pose cannot anatomically be achieved. It's been digitally manipulated. And it is, in fact, a depiction of a kind of horned entity. You've got the arms representing the horns there, you've got the eye sockets there above, and then you've got the head representing the snout, and it's deeply disturbing stuff. It's another example of those that are controlling things placing what they're doing and what they represent in plain sight for those that have got the eyes to see. And you get the eyes to see when this stuff is brought into the realms of the conscious mind, when it's pointed out what they're actually doing, and when it comes out of the subconscious, you can realize that this stuff is going on. And that's the key to not being affected by it, becoming consciously aware of what the game is. I want to move on. Thank you. Thanks. I want to move on to an extended section on the phenomenon known as predictive programming. Many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with the term and the concept. This is the way I've broken it down in my upcoming book, just to explain how it works. Predictive programming is the practice of encoding visual clues and symbols into works of popular culture aimed at large audiences which depict a real-world event, should be in there, yet to happen, or currently happening. In recognition of the powerful influence of the subconscious mind on an individual psyche, images are subtly conveyed in encoded form which foreshadow events which are known to be coming. So it's very real, it goes on all the time, and it's been going on for a very long time. One of the earliest examples of the kind of modern era, if you like, within the last 100 or so years, concerned the Titanic. Or was it? Again, we get into a question of whether the Titanic was actually what we were told it was, or whether it was in fact a ship known as the Britannic, which was swapped, but that's another story. And this is an absolute mind-blower, because there was a novel which came out in 1898 called Futility by a guy called Morgan Robertson, and it detailed the sinking of an unsinkable ship known as the Titan. What were the chances? And there are so many parallels here between this supposedly fictional story and the official story of the Titanic. The two ships had almost identical names. Both were designated unsinkable. They were both the largest ships at sea at the time. They both collided with icebergs in the month of April. Both resulted in many deaths due to a shortage of lifeboats. And both had similar floor plans and technical descriptions. You know, if you accept that this cannot possibly be a coincidence, then you have to accept that whoever creates these works of apparent fiction before a real-world event happens had advanced knowledge of what was to come and was in some way associated with those parties that caused the event to happen the way it did. That's a very early example of it. Let's bring it into contemporary times with 9/11, nice and topical. When you're looking for examples of predictive programming and how it all works, there's no better event to study than 9/11, because there are several hundred examples of various aspects of what came to pass on the 11th of September 2001 in Hollywood movies, TV shows, music videos, cartoons. You can look them up on YouTube and you could be there for weeks. There are hundreds of videos. Some of the videos go on for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and they consist of little snippets of aspects of 9/11 that were foreshadowed by way of predictive programming in the years up to 2001. There was definitely advanced knowledge of what was to pass, and all of those that created these music videos, movies, TV shows, cartoons would have been complicit in what was going to happen. How else could you explain these various aspects? As I say, there are hundreds you can look at. I've just selected a few. This is from the movie Independence Day, where you get a split-second shot of a clock counting down, and in the frame that you get to see in the movie, the clock is saying 9/11/01. So it's got the date right down to the year. In the movie The Matrix, the first Matrix movie, which came out in 1999, you get a shot of the character Neo's passport, and the expiry date on it just happens to be the 11th of September 2001. I've had a lot of synchronicities happening to me in recent weeks, and a lot of them have involved numbers. And I love it when this happens, because it's the universe communicating with you and kind of reaching out to you and connecting with you. So all these examples just fascinate me. And I had one recently because I was putting together this slideshow, and I remembered that date on Neo's passport. And I do a job, a day job, because there ain't too much money in telling the truth. Don't know if you've noticed. So you kind of have to find other ways to pay the bills. And I do a driving job. I drive people to and from airports, basically. Glorified taxi. And I had to, unfortunately, get licensed by the local council in order to do the job. And when my license came through, you can imagine my shock when the expiry date on it just happened to be the 11th of September, 2017. And I didn't even spot it at first. I had that badge for a few weeks. I was putting this presentation together and nearly lost my mind when I saw that. That's an aside anyway. I'm not part of the plot, really. So I mentioned cartoons are in on the act as well, and here was an episode of The Simpsons foreshadowing 9/11. Bart's looking at this comic with a picture of the Manhattan skyline with the Twin Towers there. It's $9. The 9 matches up with the 11. You've got New York at the top. There you go. Classic 9/11 predictive programming. This was in the late 90s, I believe, running up to 2001. A few other examples from cartoons. We have Spider-Man, we have Iron Man with a depiction of a plane going into the Pentagon. We'll get into that Supertramp record sleeve in a minute. Sesame Street, all sorts. And there's the years as well, going way back. In terms of music releases, bringing it back to the music industry, Jay-Z, I told you there'd be more about him, released his classic album, The Blueprint, on what date? At the top there. This is an Amazon entry for the album, and it turns out that of all the dates that could have been picked, it just happened to be September 11th, 2001. And bear in mind, the album was called The Blueprint. Then we had, a few years earlier, in 1997, an album from Michael Jackson, and it was called Blood on the Dance Floor. I think there's probably some Masonic lodge connotations going on there, particularly as he's dancing on a black and white checkerboard floor, representing the duality of light and dark, and good and evil, and base consciousness. It's the floor that you get in Masonic temples. Sure, it's just a coincidence. And in the background, you have a city skyline that looks quite similar to Manhattan crumbling into dust. And we've got some nice Saturn imagery going on there with the blood red colours. Busta Rhymes produced a whole bunch of albums in the 90s that all had this kind of disaster, doom-laden, apocalyptic overtone to them. He put out one called When Disaster Strikes. This one was called Extinction Level Event. And again, you get a city skyscape which looks very similar to Manhattan, and it's going up in flames, and there's absolute chaos and carnage everywhere. And that, to me, looks very much like a depiction of what would come to pass on 9/11 in a Busta Rhymes album. This one is even more blatant, and it dates to June 2001. So it's only a few weeks before the events of 9/11 actually happened. And it's a little-known hip-hop act called The Coup. And you've got the two members down the front here, in front of the Twin Towers, which are depicted as exploding in exactly the same way that we saw in the footage of September 11th. And this guy here, the front man of the group, has what seems to be some sort of remote control device, and he's pressing a button as if to trigger the explosion. And needless to say, when the events of 9/11 happened, there was a lot of controversy and outrage about this particular sleeve, and there were a lot of questions asked as well about how it was that these guys had put out a sleeve that foreshadowed what was to come to pass. It was swiftly taken off the market and replaced by another sleeve, but the question remains, how did they have foreknowledge that this was going to come to pass in exactly the way it was depicted on the sleeve? It's one of so many examples. And we're now going back to 1979, and this one's an absolute classic. If anyone had any doubts up to this point that there was foreknowledge involved, if anyone was content to put it all down to coincidence and just one of those things, I would invite them to debunk this one. So you've got the group Supertramp, the British rock group, and they put out an album in 1979 called Breakfast in America. And on the sleeve, you have a view from an aeroplane window looking out as the plane comes in over the Manhattan skyline. You've got the Twin Towers there, which were still standing at that point, of course, and you've got the waitress, and you've got the word Supertramp over the top of the skyline. Researchers are very vigilant these days, particularly in the age of the internet, and nothing gets missed. Whenever there's a very obscure kind of clue placed into a work of popular culture, it will get noticed by somebody. I've no idea how the person concerned worked this one out, but somebody realized that if you reverse the image and make a mirror reflection of it, something very interesting happens. Where you had the word Supertramp over the top, above the Twin Towers, you now have a 9 and an 11 formed from the word Supertramp. And bear in mind that we're viewing this from an aeroplane window. Somebody must have worked really hard to get that logo to fit so that when it's reversed, it spells out in that way. That one would have gone straight into the subconscious mind of anyone seeing that sleeve. They wouldn't possibly have been able to understand what it meant, but nevertheless, it was lodged in the subconscious psyche, and it was another example of them announcing what they were going to do, telling us about it. When we get into the second half of this, I'm going to give you my ideas on why they do this, why they feel the need to tell us about it, albeit in deeply encoded, cryptic form like this. Just before we move on from the 9/11 stuff and keeping it relevant to the music industry, there were a lot of references to the year 2001 in the run-up to it. What should have been so interesting about this particular year? You might think that the year 2000 would be one that was evoked in earlier works, given that it was the start of the millennium. But it wasn't. It was always 2001. Dr. Dre, back again, put out an album in 1999, which he chose to call 2001. Nobody could really understand why it was called 2001 when it came out at the end of 1999. But when you factor in the events of 9/11 and you see how it's connected to the key players in the music industry, it would appear to be another reference to what was to come, in this case, giving you the year. And you've got to wonder about what inside knowledge there was between Stanley Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke when they came up with the incredible, iconic movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. For some reason, when this story was composed in the 1960s, 2001 was chosen as the year in the future in which the events of this story would take place. It could have been any year, but 2001 was chosen. Stanley Kubrick is a fascinating guy to study. There's so much truth encoded in his films. There's so much esoteric symbolism that you can get into. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Kubrick was, if not a kind of fully paid up member of what people call the Illuminati or the secret society networks, then he was certainly in possession of knowledge of how they operate. And it's not inconceivable that he would have had some knowledge of what the plan was with regards to 9/11 all those years later in 2001 when he put together this incredible movie. 2001 again, here's one that nobody has been able to explain to me in terms of giving it a plausible explanation. Prince, the artist Prince, did a concert in December 1998, and towards the end of the show, you can get this on YouTube, you can hear the actual footage of it. He said, "We got one more, then we got to get out. I've got to go home, y'all. Got to go home to America. I've got to go get ready for the bombs." Osama bin Laden getting ready to bomb, yeah. Now, if he'd left it at that, bearing in mind this was December 1998, and Osama bin Laden had already been blamed for the Oklahoma city bombing and various other outrages, you could have said, oh, it's just a reference to the fact that bin Laden was this familiar terrorist figure of the time. But then he goes on to add, 2001 hit me in December 98. Why would that be? A few more examples of predictive programming before we move on to the second part of this presentation, which is where I'll get into some more metaphysical and esoteric concepts. This one is from a video by the rapper, so-called, I beg to differ, Lil Wayne. And it's from his wonderful song, My Home Is Still. That's the one that contains the line, "These hoes love me like Satan, man." So nice family-friendly stuff. Another one for your kids. I don't know why the hoes would love Satan in the first place, but apparently they do. So here he is in this video, in a movie theatre, surrounded by 12 skeletons. You can count them, there's 12 there, trust me. And this video came out just a few days before a lone nutter, we all know about these lone nutters, don't we, burst into a movie theatre in Aurora, Colorado, and started shooting up the place. And the official version of the story tells you that 12 people just happened to die in that movie theatre at the time. And it was during a showing of the Batman movie, The Dark Knight. So a few days before that, we get Lil Wayne, and for no apparent reason, there's no connection here to what goes on in the song, he's in this movie theatre with 12 skeletons. And one of the things about predictive programming is when they're showing you a depiction of something which is yet to come, it doesn't matter whether the event in question is genuine or whether it's a bogus, bullshit, false flag hoax, because most of them are. It doesn't matter that they're trying to get you to believe the official story of a false flag hoax or a false flag terror event such as 9/11. The important thing is that they're getting aspects of what is to come planted in the subconscious mind of the general public so that when the official story comes out, it's more readily accepted and there's some familiarity already there through elements of it that you've already seen. We all know about chemtrails and geoengineering, don't we? We do now, anyway. Not many people knew about it in 1984, but whoever was behind this particular episode of Doctor Who on the BBC, that nice organisation, there's a whole chapter on them in my book. We won't go into them today. Nobody mentioned Jimmy Savile. Back in 1984, there was an episode of Doctor Who called The Caves of Androzani, and there was a character in it known as Morgus, and at a point in the dialogue, he says, "As they used to say on Earth, every cloud has a strontium lining." And when you get into studying chemtrails, geoengineering, you hear that strontium is one of the metal nanoparticles that are present in these trails that we're getting, which is so damaging to human health. Isn't it interesting that over 30 years ago, there was this sly reference to it in an episode of Doctor Who? That may be an innocent throwaway line, but it may not. If it's not, why was it there? Again, it has no connection to the plot of the show. Yeah, there's a couple missing here, actually. Yeah, we'll go straight to this one. We get into the moon landing hoax. Johan touched on this earlier. The Apollo moon landings, which I think we would probably pretty much agree didn't happen the way we're told they did. But again, that doesn't matter because they were just trying to get you to believe the official version of the story. And there was a very interesting point in the James Bond film Diamonds Are Forever, which came out in 1971. So that would be 2 years after the first Apollo moon landing. And you get this section of the film where Sean Connery as Bond is in this underground kind of military research facility in the middle of the Nevada desert, which sounds very similar to what we hear about Area 51. And there's one point where he's trying to escape from the bad guys, and he runs across what appears to be a rigged up film set of astronauts walking on the moon. And he's running across this set trying to get away from the villains. And you've got these two astronauts, and because they're in moonwalk mode, they're trying to get him, but they're walking in slow motion like they're on the moon. And it appears to be a direct piss take of the rigged up false hoax moon landings that happened a couple of years before. It seems to me like the makers of this James Bond film were kind of letting us know that it was a hoax, and they're just having a bit of a laugh with it. And I doubt very many people at the time realised the significance of it. But once again, they're telling you what they did. In this case, rigged the whole thing up on a film set. We have a couple of more recent examples of predictive programming as well. You might remember in March of this year, there was a terrible plane crash, at least as far as we're told, where a Germanwings plane came down over the French Alps. It was on its way from, I think it was Barcelona to Germany, and we're told that the co-pilot, who was psychotic and depressed, engineered an opportunity to get the pilot out of the cockpit. He barricaded himself into the cockpit, and then he deliberately flew the plane into the ground, killing everyone on board. That's the official line of that story. There was a movie which came out a few weeks before, Isn't It Always the Case? This one was called Wild Tales, and it was an Argentinian movie. There were 6 separate plot lines, little short stories in it. In one of them, there was a guy who was an airline pilot who decided to get revenge on a bunch of people in his life that he didn't like, that had wronged him in some way. I think it was a former wife or girlfriend or something, wanted to get even with her. There was a business partner that had stiffed him on a deal, so he wanted to, get him. And he invited all these people on board a flight. And at an opportune moment during the flight, he barricaded himself into the cockpit and flew the flight into the ground, killing everyone on board. And then a few weeks after that, we get this story in the news. Every time there's a major world event that you will see on your nightly news bulletins or read about in the mainstream press, there is a work of popular culture, fiction, whether it's a movie, whether it's a music video, whether it's a cartoon, that will have depicted some aspect of what came to pass. Every time. They don't miss any. Every time they tell you what they're going to do. And if you hunt hard enough, you can always find the examples of it. There was this disgusting movie, Kingsmen, The Secret Service, that came out earlier this year. And it came out round about the time that we're told this guy, Dylan Roof, went on the rampage in a church in Charleston, South Carolina, and shot up the congregation of largely African Americans. Just before that happened, in this movie, Kingsmen, we get Colin Firth's character, who's a Secret Service agent, who, in a mind-controlled state, goes into a church and starts slaughtering the entire congregation. He shoots them, he stabs them, beats them over the head with whatever. It's presented in a comedy kind of way. They're trying to make light of this and make the violence fun in the movie. Making massacres fun. But nevertheless, it seems to be yet another example of what was to come to pass in the Charleston church shooting. Going way back to the Beatles, I told you we'd get there. Let's get into Paul is Dead, shall we? The theory that the real Paul McCartney died in 1966 and was replaced by an imposter who's been taking his place ever since. I know it sounds ridiculous when you first hear it, and it sounds impossible, but I've done a lot of research into this theory, as have many other authors and researchers. There's a book by Jim Fetzer called And I Suppose We Didn't Go to the Moon Either. And I think Ule Damagard was involved in that book as well, which examines various so-called conspiracy theories. And in the book is a collection of essays from different researchers, all focusing on this idea that the guy we think of today as Paul McCartney is not the real deal. I've come to understand that the corporate music industry is very much steeped in dark occult practices. It is unfortunately very much steeped in sacrifice from time to time, human sacrifice. I know it sounds outrageous, but there is evidence to support this. And as we've seen, it loves its symbolism and it loves conveying aspects of what it's doing or what it's done to the general public, in the knowledge that most people won't be able to see it. Most people will not understand. Only a few ever will. And I think, as do many others, that there were many aspects relating to the replacement of Paul McCartney that were put into the works of the Beatles. There are 2 theories as to what happened. The conventional one is that Paul McCartney got into an argument with the other Beatles early one morning after a recording session in London. And he jumped into his convertible sports car and sped off through the streets of London, and he was involved in a tragic, fateful accident in which he was near decapitated and killed instantly. And then the official version of this story goes that Brian Epstein, the manager of the Beatles, and the others in the group and those that were controlling the Beatles panicked at the loss of the key member of the group, and they worked very quickly to find somebody to take his place. That version of the story does seem a little implausible to me, because it does depend on there being someone available that wasn't doing anything for the next 50 or 60 years, you know, that was happy to step into McCartney's shoes and play the part of him. I think it's far more feasible that there was some time taken before this replacement was introduced. There was a period in which whoever it was that took the place of McCartney was able to train up for the role and prepare for it. There was probably some element of changing his appearance, plastic surgery and such. And it seems far more likely in that event that the real Paul McCartney was deliberately taken out for whatever reason. And this was known about for some time before it actually happened, to allow for the replacement to come in. But nevertheless, there are many symbolic clues as to what happened. The sleeve of the Abbey Road album is one which is constantly cited as letting you know what went on. This came out in 1969. You got the four Beatles in various garb there, and it's supposed to represent McCartney, who is barefooted in a loose-fitting suit, as a corpse. It's supposed to represent a funeral procession, with John Lennon in white as the priest, with Ringo in black as the Undertaker, and George Harrison in jeans as the Undertaker. That's supposed to be the symbology of this picture. And it's interesting that McCartney is holding a cigarette in his right hand there, when the real Paul McCartney is on record as having been left-handed. From 1966 onwards, McCartney suddenly became right-handed. There were more clues in the sleeve to Sgt. Pepper, the classic Beatles album. Many of them in there, but again, this album sleeve is taken to represent a funeral, with the original Beatles kind of being laid to rest and the new version of the Beatles being introduced to the world. Lots of clues in the lyrics to some of those songs as well, particularly when it comes to the introduction of the character Billy Shears, who is taken by the majority of researchers to be the person that took over the place of McCartney. And then you get into all kinds of forensic evidence when it comes to the pre-1966 McCartney and the version of him post-1966 that we've all come to accept as Paul McCartney. Because, you know, you'd have to have been around a pretty long time to have any recollection of the Paul McCartney that the world saw before 1966. Most of us in this room have only ever known the guy that came along after that date. All kinds of forensic evidence, as I say, to suggest that a switch took place. The most convincing for me is simply the height of the post-1966 McCartney. So on the left here, you've got a picture of the real James Paul McCartney with his girlfriend Jane Asher, sometime in the 1960s, and you can see they're pretty much the same height, more or less. Then you have a picture from post-1966, again with Jane Asher, but this time you see McCartney towering above her, quite a bit taller. Is that the same guy? There are some interesting things about the year 1966, just as there were with 2001, the 35-year gap between them. But there's a lot of significance in this story, I feel, to 1966. I don't know if the two sixes, the 66, are connected to the 666 that we saw earlier on, but either way, there's a lot of occult, kind of dark occult relevance to 66. That was the year in which Anton LaVey established the Church of Satan, which was kind of a front group interface for celebrities of the day. There were many celebrity members of the Church of Satan, including Jane Mansfield and Sammy Davis Jr. back in the day. More recently, Marilyn Manson, Mark Almond of Soft Cell is a member of it. There was the movie Rosemary's Baby, which is probably the most chilling film ever made. You know, it's far more scary than The Omen or The Exorcist for me, because from what I've been able to establish, there's a lot of truth to the narrative of what goes on in this movie. It's actually about this young couple that move into an apartment building in New York, which just happens to be the Dakota building, outside which John Lennon was murdered. And the guy is a wannabe actor. He's an up-and-coming actor, but he's not having much success. And he falls in with this network of Satanists who offer to give him the fame and the fortune and the success that he craves, but there is a heavy price to pay. And if that's not an allegory for what really goes on in the entertainment industry, then I don't know what is. This movie was directed by Roman Polanski, a big-time insider when it comes to knowledge of how these things all work. The interesting thing about it is this movie, which, as I said, is all about networks of Satanists, came out in 1968, but it was set in 1966. And you see a calendar on the wall stating that it's 1966, and one of the lead Satanist characters in it states this is year one. So it's the year that the Church of Satan was established. It's described as year one in the movie Rosemary's Baby, as if it's the countdown to something, or, you know, it's significant in some way. I came to find out that construction of the World Trade Center Twin Towers commenced in 1966. And there are many researchers that believe these towers were specifically constructed with the intent of them being brought down in that massive dark occult ritual that was 9/11, 35 years later. We have another link there between 1966 and 2001. Lastly, before we move on to the second part of the presentation, this is the Georgia Guidestones. I'm sure many are familiar with them. They are said to contain a number of, it's basically a wish list, a bucket list of the elite controllers, so-called, in terms of the things that they want to achieve in human society, their grand plan. And the most famous of them is their wish for massive population reduction. The first tenet on these granite guidestones is maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. And it appears to be another example of them telling you what they plan to do. So let's move on. The connections between what I've just presented and what I'm about to will hopefully become clear as we progress. When I first started writing this book, the intention was for it to be a collection of all these things that I'd come to discover about the true nature of the corporate entertainment industry. So it was going to be the dark occult symbolism, it was going to be the predictive programming, it was going to be mind-controlled artists, backmasking, subliminal audio messages, and all of that. And all that is in the book. But during the process of writing it over the last year, I came to understand some other great truths, and I gained a lot of knowledge about some other subjects. And one of them was a deep understanding of how natural law works. Much of this ties into what we heard Johan talking about this morning, and I'm absolutely on the same page as him with so much of what he presented. Natural law goes by many different names. It's known as universal law sometimes, cosmic law, karmic law, the law of cause and effect, consequentialism. Whatever label you put on it, the principle is always the same. It's laws of morality to govern human behavior, which are set in place by the creative force behind the universe, which many people would choose to call God and put many other different labels on it. Again, doesn't matter what you refer to it as, the principle is still the same. It's universal, it applies everywhere, it's eternal, and it doesn't matter whether any one individual believes it, It doesn't matter whether anyone chooses to accept it. It goes on being eternal truth regardless. You can try and resist it all you want. You can say it's bullshit and you don't believe it all you want, but it doesn't change a thing. We are all governed by natural law, or whatever other name you want to put on it. And the fundamental principles of it can be summed up very, very simply. It's so simple, a child of 5 could understand it, though perhaps not in this language. And it can be summed up in the phrase, do no harm, but take no shit. It can be expanded. The non-aggression principle, an expression of the sacred feminine that exists everywhere in nature. That's the do no harm bit. Then the self-defense principle, the sacred masculine, is the but take no shit. And the do no harm bit basically states, do not treat others in a way you would not wish to be treated yourself. It is so simple, you wonder why it's not taught in schools. Or perhaps not. The way it all works is explained so well by Mark Passio, a fantastic researcher and public speaker and activist out of the US. You can see all his work at the website whatonearthishappening.com, which comes highly recommended. And I do use some of his quotes because he just has a way of putting things so simply and in such an easily digestible, understandable form that there can be no room for ambiguity. You know, it's childishly straightforward. The bottom line is, if you wouldn't want a person doing a certain behavior to you, don't do it to another person. The end. And people can't get that simple message. That's the golden rule in the apophatic sense. Do not do to others what you do not want done to you. And then he expands on it. The solution is so simple, it always has been. Don't treat others the way you yourself wouldn't want to be treated. It's so simple, it's almost stupid, folks. It can't get any simpler than that, and yet humanity has proven we still can't grasp it. So, natural law is there to dish out circumstances and karmic consequences in line with the behaviors that we choose to take. We, as humans, are gifted with free will. The capacity for free will, the ability to make decisions for ourselves in terms of our thoughts, behaviours and actions. And we can choose to take thoughts, behaviours and actions that are in line with natural law and are in line with morality, or we can choose to go against that. The choice is with us, but either way, you reap the consequences of the choice that you make. And that comes either on an individual basis or more commonly on a collective macrocosmic basis. So when you have large numbers of people in human society, the vast majority of people, taking thoughts, behaviours and actions which are immoral, which don't follow that basic rule, do not treat others in a way you would not wish to be treated yourself, you end up with a world of suffering, chaos, violence, and insanity, which is pretty much what we've got, I would say. Relating this to the situation in my country, the UK, we know that there is a massive network of child rapists in Parliament and in the establishment. We know this, it's in the mainstream realm. You don't even have to look at the alternative media to know this. It's been in the Daily Mail, it's been on the BBC. We know that there are criminals and liars in government. We know that these institutions are all deeply corrupt, and yet most people in the UK simply don't give a shit. They just don't care. They look at all this stuff happening, and yet they will not object to it or withdraw their consent for it in any way. And so for as long as their tacit approval and their support is in place, we get more of the same, and these systems continue. You very much get what you deserve. You could argue that individuals, such as those of us here, those of us that have taken responsibility to discover truth and to align our behaviours in our lives accordingly do not deserve everything that's going on in the world. But collectively, I guess we must, because it's going on. And it's not until large numbers of people, many, many people, come to understand how these laws of morality work and how karmic consequences are dished out in accordance with the choices that they make, that anything is going to change. And it's all about consent. There are three main reasons given for why predictive programming is in place. One of them, which I touched on briefly, is that by presenting a depiction of what is to come in a movie or whatever, they are planting a representation of it into the subconscious mind of the general public, so that when the news bulletin comes out with the official version, there's a familiarity there. And the subconscious mind is going, hang on a minute, I know about this, I've heard about this sounds familiar to me, which enables them to sell the official story that much easier. Another variation on that is that by presenting a depiction of what is to come, they are creating a kind of energetic two-way link between the general public and those that are offering the story. And they are trawling and kind of harvesting the collective energy, life energy force of the general public that are viewing this, and that energy is being used to help empower the event into physical manifestation. They're expressing their wish and their will through the imagery that you see, and we are actually aiding them to empower it into being by giving our energy to it, albeit on an unconscious basis. We don't realise that we're doing it. So that's certainly a reason given for why predictive programming is used, and I think there is some truth to it. But I think the main reason why it's done is because the dark occult controllers are in full knowledge of how natural law works. They understand the nature of reality. They understand consequentialism. And by telling us what they plan to do, they are getting our tacit approval for it. Because we don't stand up in large numbers and say, we do not consent to this, you cannot do this. They take our lack of no as a yes, and they feel that it gives them a green light to go right ahead and do what they always planned to do, and that this somehow enables them to escape the karmic consequence that would ordinarily come down to bear on them for being in complete opposition to natural law. It's a very twisted, sick, perverted way of looking at things, but we are talking about very sick, twisted, perverted psychopaths that are running this world and that are controlling these industries. So we shouldn't be too surprised that they've got a very skewed and distorted version of how it all works. Thanks. Here's Passio again. As I say, I'll quote him so much because he just absolutely nails it. And here he is expanding on that idea. One of the dark principles of their ideological tenets is that if you tell people what you're doing, even if it's telling them wordlessly through symbols or numbers, then you've somehow gotten their implied consent because they haven't said no. And to not say no is to tacitly say yes in their mentality. So that, in their mind, relieves the burden of karma that would ordinarily come down upon them for directing these actions, because they don't actually take these actions, they get their order-following house slave dogs to do it for them. In their mind, because they told you in a wordless, occult way, then in some way that alleviates the karma, because they did say it in some form. It's a sick, twisted way of looking at it, isn't it just? But there's agreement from many other researchers in this subject. Fritz Springmeier, who's done a lot of work into trauma-based mind control and many other subjects, in an interview with me for one of my podcasts, mentioned there's a reference in Scripture where Satan has to come before God to ask permission to mess with Job's life. So people who are religious will often say that God insists evil broadcasts what it's going to do. You don't just have a free ticket to go ahead and do evil, but you have to tell. It's called revelation of the method. Thomas Sheridan, Irish researcher and radio host, telling us is part of the magic. We have to consent. That's why they blow the whistle on what they do through all kinds of books and movies and so on. And they'll often show us a hint of things before they do them. And this is how their sorcery, their black Hexan paganism works. You have to be told. And expanding on that, this is why Dracula always knocked on the door and asked to be let in. He has to be invited. The devil has to be invited in. Then you forfeited your right to say, I was taken by surprise. No, you brought it in. This is why we all have to learn what they're doing to us. The best weapon we have against them is our refusal. We saw an aspect of this in the movie The Exorcist. Anyone that's seen it will recall that the Reagan character, Linda Blair, the young girl, finds a Ouija board in the attic and starts messing about with it. And it's only after she does that that this demonic entity enters into her. The demonic entity was effectively invited in through this connection that she created with the Ouija board. She didn't understand what she was doing, but nevertheless, she opened the portal, and only then could that evil come into her. It had to be by consent. We have one missing there. I'll tell you what it is. It's a quote from The Truman Show movie with Jim Carrey. The basic plot of that is that this guy finds out that his entire life has been effectively a reality TV show, and that he's been studied and watched and surveilled for his whole life, and he's living in this kind of virtual reality, this massive TV set, and nothing is real. And there's a character, Christoph, who is his handler, who says in the movie, Truman could leave at any time if his was more than just a vague ambition. If he was absolutely determined to discover the truth, there's no way we could prevent him. So he could have left that world any time he'd chosen to if he'd applied his will to it. But for as long as we give our consent to a situation and we don't object to it in any way, the situation continues. And that's the reality that we're living in. Oh, there it is. Anyway, manipulated consent. These are aspects of our daily lives that we're all familiar with, which continue because in the collective macrocosmic sense, there is continued approval and consent for them. But in each case, you're told what's going on, or you have the opportunity to research and discover what's going on, and thus withdraw your consent to it through your free will consciousness. And I've listed a few examples of how this goes on. Whenever there's a foreign war of occupation, we're always told about it beforehand, aren't we? Through the news, mainstream media. They concoct some bullshit story as an excuse for going in there, weapons of mass destruction, or he's killing his own people, or whatever it may be. They always let you know what they're planning to do. So we heard about the Syria situation before it went on. We heard about Afghanistan, Iraq. They were banging the drums of war before the troops went in there. And not a whole lot of people seemed to object enough to it because they went on anyway. But we were told. Institutionalised paedophilia, particularly in the UK. We know it's going on. As I mentioned, the mainstream media is reporting this. We know that Jimmy Savile was employed by the BBC for over 50 years, and it's in the public domain that he was sexually abusing kids on BBC premises paid for by licence payers' money, the tax that we have to pay to watch telly. Not great value for money. But we knew it was going on, and there are new revelations. It came out the other week that a former British Prime Minister, Edward Heath, almost certainly abused kids and almost certainly murdered young boys and took them out on this yacht that he had and dumped the bodies at sea. That is a story that was reported in the mainstream media. People should be outraged that this could have been the case with a former serving British Prime Minister. I like to think that there's a parallel universe somewhere where this news breaks and the nation is up in arms about it. They are going in huge numbers outside Parliament. They're demanding that the government is taken down straight away. They're demanding that people are brought to justice. They're demanding that those that are still alive go immediately to jail, and they won't rest until they get that justice. But not in this parallel universe, sadly. In this one, it just continues, and people just put up with it. And they're more concerned about what's for tea tonight and who their favourite football team is playing at the weekend than this stuff is going on. Until that mindset changes, don't expect anything else to change. Vaccines. We know that vaccines are very detrimental to human health. We know about some of the stuff that goes into them. Mercury, formaldehyde, aborted fetus, monkey brain tissue, and all these other horrors that people allow to be put into their children, You can research this stuff if you have the will to do it. And when you've researched it, you will doubtless conclude that it's not a good idea to put this toxic crap into your body. You have the opportunity to say no to it. Sodium fluoride in water and toothpaste, aspartame in children's fizzy drinks and sweets, E numbers in all kinds of food stuff. Not a great idea, not really too good for human health, as any research will show you. But you're always told that it's in there. You can pick up a bottle of squash, and if it's got aspartame in it, it will be listed in the ingredients. So you have the opportunity to see that it's there. Sodium fluoride is listed in toothpaste ingredients. You have that opportunity. You can find out if the water supply in your area is fluoridated. I think the water companies are obligated to tell you that if you specifically ask the question. So the opportunity is always there to know. And a classic one is cigarettes. The health risks involved with smoking are always listed on the pack. They're telling you that this could kill you, and if you go ahead and smoke them anyway, then it was your choice, and the karma is relieved from them. So many other ways in which it's done. We have CCTV everywhere. It's on buses now. It's even in restaurants. But as far as the buses are concerned, the bus companies are obligated to let you know when you get on that bus that CCTV is in operation and that you may be recorded. So they're telling you about it. And the same thing with public buildings. There are always notices advising you. Speed cameras on the roads. I can speak for the UK. I can't speak for every country, but as far as the UK goes, they can't put up one of these speed cameras without giving you a sign a short way back on the road advising you that there's a camera somewhere in the vicinity. So if you get snapped and you get fined, you were told it's your fault, not theirs, as they see it. Small print in credit card and mobile phone contracts. Nobody ever reads it because it's so bloody boring. 6 pages of stuff that you can't even see. But it's all there. They're telling you how they're going to stitch you up. They're telling you how they're going to rob you blind. And if you don't take the time to read it, as far as they're concerned, then bad luck. And then the police reading you your rights. They go through that same script all the time, don't they? You do not have to say anything and all the rest of it. So if you get fitted up, you were told that it was going to happen. It's always all about consent. And as we said, they don't play fair about it, because there are many instances in which we couldn't reasonably be expected to understand what's being done to us. A great example of this is the way that we are effectively sold into slavery to the control system by way of our birth certificate. When our parents register our birth, in most cases, they don't know any better. I registered my 2 kids with a birth certificate because I didn't know any better at the time. But what's actually happening is a corporate entity in your name is being created at the time you register a birth with the government. And that corporate entity is owned by the Crown Corporation of the City of London, and the name that represents you can be traded on the stock market and all sorts of outrageous things. And of course, as Johan mentioned earlier, this is not the real you. This is the legal fiction of you. And yet this goes on with most people that are born into this society, and they have no idea about it. But we do now have the opportunity to learn about these things, as vast numbers of people are proving. The internet is here, and it's available for anyone that cares to put the time and the effort into doing the research. There's no reason now not to know about anything that is being done to us. It just requires the diligence to do the research. And it requires large numbers of people taking on that responsibility before anything will change. But that's where the solution lies. In understanding truth and in taking that responsibility to apply it to your daily life. So when you find out how a stage illusionist does his tricks, David Blaine maybe, or Derren Brown, or Siegfried and Roy, they do these seemingly impossible tricks, pulling a rabbit out of a hat, manifesting a tiger out of nowhere, doing card tricks, whatever it is. It can seem impossible when you see that trick for the first time. But if that magician takes the time to break down how they did that trick and explain it in great detail, so you go, so that's how that illusion was achieved. The next time you see that illusionist up on a stage or on TV doing that same trick, you are not going to be fooled by it the way you were the first time, because you now understand the methods. You know how it's being achieved. And I think the key to our free will and our consent being hijacked and manipulated the way it is, which gives these psychopaths a green light to go right ahead and continue doing what they're doing as they see it. The key to it is in large numbers of people understanding what's being done to them, understanding the methods that are used, and taking on that responsibility to say, we do not consent to this anymore, we're not having it, what are you going to do now? The choice is always ours. That is the gift of free will consciousness. And the opportunity is always there not to consent. And as many researchers that will be up on this stage will tell you, we have the opportunity to shape the experiences that we undergo by way of our consciousness, by way of our will. We can physically manifest that which we wish to occur if our thoughts, behaviours and actions are all in alignment. And if you have large numbers of people all wishing and willing a certain scenario to take place, and they're all unified and balanced and all on the same page with each other, then the reality that we see playing out in the physical will be very, very different to the situation we've got at the moment. So the choice is with us collectively. Do we want more of the same? Or do we want things to change? And if we do, how much do we want it? And large numbers of people have to come to understand this information, I feel. And it is a responsibility of everyone who has come to understand this themselves to communicate it as widely as they can to others if anything is ever going to change. Always a choice. Which way is it going to go? This is just an excerpt from my book, which I wanted to put in there because I'll probably forget to say it otherwise, but this is a note on which I wanted to finish the book. Understanding the concepts of consent and free will approval and the extent to which the powers that shouldn't be recognise they are bound by it is where our true power lies. Without our approval, they would stand in full judgment for the crimes they commit against humanity. They do anyway. They just don't think they do. They're in for a shock. Their understanding of the fact that they would be taking on the full karmic consequence for actions which they alone chose would present a very different state of affairs to the one we currently have. This shift can only be achieved through vast numbers of people understanding deeply the methods that are being used against us. So I hope I've tied together all the early stuff about the music industry and Jay-Z videos and stuff with this and shown how they are actually connected, and you can make sense of one through the other. Another quote that I have to finish my book from this great researcher from the UK, Matt Hancock. The authorised, controlled opposition misleaders are there to derail us, to interfere with our natural process of realising truth. They've chosen their path, but we're not obliged to give them any attention whatsoever. The individual mind is one of the greatest gifts imaginable. Therefore, one of the greatest crimes is to steal the ability of that mind to perceive reality. That's why they do so much mind control. Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven is, people have different opinions on this song. There are some dark occult aspects to it, to be sure, which I get into in the book with backmasking and all sorts, but I happen to still think it's a great song. I love it. And what a great lyric as well. Yes, there are two paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on. John Lennon from Watching the Wheels could have chosen any Lennon lyric of hundreds. The guy was a genius. But from this one, Watching the Wheels, people asking questions, lost in confusion, I tell them there's no problem, only solutions. Just want to mention before I finish the Conscious Music podcast that I produce every fortnight. I don't want to give the impression by talking about all the satanic, dark stuff that goes on in the upper levels of the mainstream music industry that there is no hope when it comes to musical output and that there's nothing meaningful being put out there. There absolutely is. There's underground music available from non-corporate controlled artists if you know where to look and if you dig deep enough. And I've taken on this podcast that I do every fortnight called The Sound of Freedom, where I showcase music of that nature. It's contemporary, modern stuff, mainly hip-hop, but also reggae and some dance music. And I go way back to previous decades as well, selecting songs such as the John Lennon song and, records by Curtis Mayfield and Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye, going way back to the 60s and 70s, where the lyrics absolutely speak to us in these times and carry great messages. So this podcast is available via iTunes. You can subscribe to it, Sound of Freedom. It's on Podomatic, also SoundCloud and Mixcloud. I do a conversation-based podcast as well called Good Vibrations. That's where I get into all manner of subjects, conspiracy, spirituality, truth, freedom, all that sort of stuff. I've had Frank on, I've had Ule Damagard on, I've had Ken O'Keefe on, and a whole load of others as well. Great many conversations there. I'm up to 70 of those. That's available on my SoundCloud as well. Might want to take a listen. I've got an event coming up in the UK next month, which I'm co-promoting. Kind of similar to this in nature, although I probably won't get as many people. It's called the Truth and Freedom All Dayer. It's a showcase for all this kind of information. Just want to put that out there in my home territory. And everything else that I do is available via my main website, which is markdevlin.co.uk. The book is going to be called Musical Truth. I'm aiming to get it out in the first quarter of next year. So hopefully by March at the latest, I want that to be on the streets. I think I'm pretty much done. Thanks for listening.
Look, thank you so much, Mark. Wonderful. So now we have Q&A. So any questions popping up? Yep.
It's just because I read about a long time ago that the music industry and the jail industry worked together because they were making the music industry were making the music with frequency, so it made people dumber. And that's why they wanted to fill up the jails more with people by listening to that music, because it had the frequency of them, you know, getting them a bit more stupid than they otherwise were. But I just want to hear your opinion on that, if that is something that is true or not, because I did not find the source of, you know, the information that I read that was, you know, something I could rely on or not.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. There was a letter which appeared in the hip-hop press about 3 years ago, and this specifically relates to hip-hop music. And it was from a guy who claimed to have been a former executive with one of the big record corporations. And he says that he, along with representatives of all the other big corporations at the time, were called to a meeting at a private residence in Los Angeles in 1991. And they had a guest speaker that was wheeled out that none of them recognized. And the guy said that he was a representative of the US private prison industry, prisons for profit. And he explained to these record company executives how they were all going to work together to change the face of hip-hop music and to change it from this once meaningful form of expression, this beautiful art form, into one which completely degraded and debased black people, that corrupted their moral values, and which promoted lifestyles which would see millions of young black males mimicking what they heard their favourite hip-hop artists talking about on the tracks. So it's more to do with the lyrics than the sound frequencies, although the sound frequencies do play a part. But this was the birth of what's come to be known as gangster rap. And it was where hip-hop changed to the point that pretty much every act out there, or every mainstream act out there, was talking about gang banging, busting guns, selling drugs, you know, promiscuous sex, gold rims on their cars, the acquisition of gold chains and material brands and all of that. And a lot of people have claimed that the letter was a hoax, but I think looking at the way things have panned out, it was probably absolutely genuine. And it's understandable that this individual would have wanted to remain anonymous, and it took them 20 years to come forward with this story. But you look at the way this genre has played out, it's virtually impossible to find any mainstream hip-hop track, and by that I mean one that would have been on heavy radio rotation, on MTV video rotation, and that you would have heard in clubs and bars as you go out, in the last 10 years, that deals with anything other than gang banging, guns, selling drugs, having promiscuous sex, partying, champagne, gold rims, Armani suits, and all that bullshit. You know, there is nothing positive, there is nothing conscious, there's nothing meaningful in the genre of hip-hop anymore. And I mean, you can't even call it hip-hop. And so I think the record companies did work in collaboration with the private prison industry in the States. There were opportunities for all of them to make money out of there being a constant supply of young black males who were naively allowing themselves to be led astray by the heroes that they heard on these hip-hop tracks. And we've had the movie Straight Outta Compton just recently, the NWA biopic, which pretty much chronicles that era. It's set in that time. And when you understand what happened, you can actually see in the movie how that agenda is playing out. So that particular genre has been very much degraded and corrupted, and it's nothing like it was. And we can see how it was done.
Yes, I have another question. It's on the last few years around transhumanism and black goo. And all these music videos with Nicki Minaj, and there's something in the sound which is really awful. It's like you can't listen to that music. It goes into the brain in a certain way, like no other music, even not hip-hop or these other periods. Have you anything to say about that?
Well, that music makes me feel physically ill. I can't listen to it. I'm serious. I can't. If it comes on the radio, I have to turn it off. If I'm in a bar or a club, I have to walk out because the music of the likes of Nicki Minaj, Lil Wayne, Drake, 2 Chainz, Big Sean, most of Rihanna's stuff, Beyonce's stuff, Kanye West, I can't listen to that stuff. And I'm convinced that there's something. I mean, Kanye West has been utterly degraded, systematically degraded as an artist, and I go into this in the book. He started out as a conscious, positive kind of persona, and he was making great music, but as the years went by, you can actually chart the deterioration of his lyrics and his persona, and it's very clearly in line with an agenda. But what they're doing with this music is they are altering the production methods, the sound frequencies. They're using sound frequencies that don't sit well with the human energy field and with human brain waves. And they create a discordant, dissonant effect, which is why a lot of people can't listen to that stuff. It grates, it sounds horrible, certainly does to me. And that is going hand in hand with the lyrics. And when you get into the lyrics of the likes of Nicki Minaj, again, remembering that the fan base will be largely young girls, it's just disgusting. One of her lyrics is, "Kiss my arse and my anus because it's finally famous." And she's talking about, I mean, that's not even the worst one, but it's absolute toxic filth and garbage masquerading as this cool, fashionable thing. And they're getting the current young generation of music fans into this stuff, and they're normalizing it. They're getting them used to the idea that this is hip-hop, this is where it's at, kids, this is music that speaks to your generation. And, if you're old enough to remember what went before, you can see how disgusting and toxic the whole thing is. The other thing that they're doing is they're drenching every goddamn thing these days with auto-tune, which is this horrific method of vocal production. It's a software plugin where they make the vocalist sound like a bloody robot. They go all electronic and digital. And this has become the norm. The majority of so-called R&B and hip-hop records is even getting into reggae records now and pop music. All the tune is drenched in auto-tune, and it makes the vocalist sound like a bloody robot, and it's not by accident, because this is all part of the transhumanism agenda, where they want to merge humanity with technology. And there's so much to say about that, but auto-tune is definitely a part of the agenda. So there's all these toxic components going into the music, and it's no accident that, it's no surprise that it makes people feel so unwell, because it's meant to do that.
I just wanted to know your take on the whole Michael Jackson death. If there was some mysterious things to that.
Well, I think they were. Very little is as it seems in this world, and very little is as it seems in the entertainment industry. I've got a section in the book where I'm looking into the many strange discrepancies and anomalies that arise in the case of certain high-profile music artist deaths. And it goes right back to Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones in 1969, and then you've got Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin in 1970, Jim Morrison in 1971, and then going forward, Bob Marley 1981, slightly before that, John Lennon in 1980, then Michael Jackson, 2009, and Whitney Houston, 2012. And in each case, there are many unanswered questions, many things that don't add up. With Michael Jackson, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that he was mind-controlled from a very early age, trauma-based mind control, which is something that is endemic throughout the entertainment industry, and many A-list artists will have undergone this. There's actually a lot of symbolism to suggest that Michael Jackson was part of that program. We saw him doing the sixth sign as a young boy, and he was obviously greatly manipulated and controlled by his overbearing father from an early age. And so I think mind control was present throughout his career. There is evidence that he was kind of breaking through that, and that the programming to a certain extent was starting to wear off, because he did make a few interesting public statements. He made a statement about Tommy Mottola, the CEO of Columbia Records, saying that he was devilish and he was Satan. And he described Columbia as an evil corporation. And then he brought out tracks like History, where he was talking about how the official version of history has been manipulated and changed to give us a version that they want us to believe. So I think he was becoming a bit of a liability. He was becoming a bit unpredictable because his humanity was starting to break through the mind control programming. That's my take on it. I think he was stitched up with those 2 child abuse cases, the allegations. I think they are a classic sign of what they try and do to discredit people that are starting to get a bit close to the truth, or that they don't want the public paying attention to. So it's my view that he was absolutely stitched up. And it's my view that they decided to take him out when they did. Some people think that with the series of concerts that he was due to do in Wembley just before he died, he was going to use those as some kind of public platform to say who knows what and reveal who knows what. And they couldn't take that chance, so the decision was taken to take him out at that time in ritualistic fashion. It seems to be whenever they decide to take one of their artists out, it's always steeped in occult symbolism. They decide to make a ritual of it. So Conrad Murray, the Doctor, would have been absolutely the fall guy for it. Yet another patsy, the lone nutter in this case. They like to just pin it on one individual so that there's no suggestion of a conspiracy. So I don't know what happened to him beyond that, but I don't think it was, as we were told, that Conrad Murray just screwed up.
I would like to know what your take is on metal music, with many of the satanic and occult stuff you mentioned earlier being completely mainstream in metal music and not subliminal at all, used as covers and T-shirts and so on. What's your take on that?
I've not studied metal music very much, to be honest. I've spent so much time delving into hip-hop and pop music generally that metal's never really been my thing, and I've not looked into it in any great depth. I've kind of skimmed the surface of it enough to understand that there are some very dark occult and satanic elements to it. Black Sabbath and Ozzy Osbourne are an obvious example of that. There was a lot of backmasking, reverse subliminal messages that went into the recordings of the likes of Black Sabbath. We saw it with Led Zeppelin as well. One story that does spring to mind, though, is that the phenomenon of backmasking, backwards subliminal messages in recordings, came into the public domain in 1990, related to the group Judas Priest. And there was a court case related to these 2 young guys. I think one was 18 and one was 20. And they went out and killed themselves. They shot themselves. And the prosecution alleged that it was listening to a Judas Priest record, a particular track from an album of 5 years earlier, which contained the lyric, "Do it, do it." Quite a simple lyric, but this was spliced into the recording backwards. And the claim was that they had interpreted this lyric, "Do it, do it," as "go out and kill yourselves." And they'd been smoking weed and drinking alcohol that night, and then they went out with 2 shotguns and, shot themselves in the head. And the case, in the end, was thrown out, and it was shown to have no merit. But it did put the idea of backmasking and subliminal messages into the public domain. And people started talking about it, and for many, it was the first time they'd heard of the idea that there could be messages hidden in recordings. So I think there's a lot more of that goes on in heavy metal music and heavy rock, but it's something I need to study in more depth. Any more?
Hi. Thanks. What about AC/DC, the old singer? He used to sing about jailbreak and all that kind of stuff, like funny stuff, and then the new singer is all about guns and what about it's totally different. I mean, that's totally. It's very clear how subliminal, how it's convert it into like a violent thing, that it's not supposed to be music, it's not supposed to be funny anymore, it's supposed to be violent or perverted or something like that.
Again, I'm not too familiar with the output of AC/DC. I just know what I see on the surface of it, really. But yeah, I'm sure that ties into the same agenda. I can't really listen to heavy metal music. It makes me feel bad in the same way that appalling hip-hop does. I know heavy metal fans would want to lynch me for saying that, but it's just the way I feel about it. There are a lot of connections between heavy metal and heavy rock and Aleister Crowley, however, which keep popping up. I mean, this guy is like a rock star in his own right. The dark occultist Aleister Crowley that was involved with many occult secret societies, and his lifestyle was pretty much all about sex and drugs and rock and roll. He was involved in ritual sex magic to bring about energetic shifts and changes, and that involved all manner of debauchery and hedonism and all the sort of stuff you hear about at elite ritual parties. It makes Eyes Wide Shut look like a Girl Guide's picnic. And, he was into mind-altering drugs and all of that. And for that reason, he seems to have become something of a folk hero in music. And not just heavy rock music, but pretty much every genre. The Beatles were heavily influenced by Crowley, as were the Rolling Stones. You have Elton John saying that he was a student of Crowley. Also David Bowie, Led Zeppelin. Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin bought Aleister Crowley's home, Boleskine House, on the shores of Loch Ness, where all sorts of supernatural things are said to have occurred. And Jay-Z has worn a Do What Thou Wilt sweatshirt, which is one of Crowley's phrases from Thelema. So, the influence of Aleister Crowley is everywhere, and it seems to be quite prevalent in that genre. I'm sorry I can't speak any more about AC/DC because I just don't know enough about them, but it's probably the same type of agenda as we see with all this toxic hip-hop, where there are sound frequencies and lyrics and production methods all working hand in hand to produce a discordant effect in the listener. I used to think this was bullshit. I used to think this couldn't possibly be the case. I was in heavy denial, but I've done the research and I now understand a bit about how reality works, and I understand that this can absolutely be achieved, and I'm sure it's going into that heavy metal genre as much as any other. Should we do a couple more, yeah? Yours and then one other, yeah?
I've got one here.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I've just got two quick questions.
Okay.
The first one is, if you had another child, you would not get it registered? That's the first question. I'm just thinking if something like a car accident happens, or you need, some kind of trauma-based incident. I don't know. I can imagine a lot of stuff. But the second thing is, when you talked about this genre and the things that are not appealing, and you said, all these artists, you don't like the music. I'm one of the girls who like it. I'm one of the young kids, I'm appealed to this kind of music. I'm the one who turned the music up. I like it. Where do we go from here? Is it just like organic stuff? We just stop listening to things that are bad or mainstream? Where do we go from here? How do I convert this into my everyday life?
Okay, well, that's a good question. I'll address the birth certificate one first. I do now know better, but until there is a system in place which large numbers of people are a part of, I don't have any kind of feasible alternative at my disposal. If I had another child, I have no plans to, but if I did, I would probably have to conform to letting that child be registered in the same way that the others were, because there is no alternative system in place yet to provide a reasonable other way of doing things. And as you say, if you don't register in that way, you miss out on schooling and healthcare, so-called, not always great things to have, but you are unplugged from the rest of society, and there are, problems that can be experienced. There are clearly an alternative way of doing things needs to be set in place, and the current system has to go. But I'm just one individual and I don't have the solution as to how that can be achieved. That has to be done by way of large numbers of people coming together, pooling their consciousness and working together to devise an alternative system. I can't really say anything beyond that. In terms of the music that you listen to that is obviously aimed at your generation, I completely understand your stance on it. The reason I understand it is because when I came up as a DJ in the early years, the sort of music that I listened to was the sort of stuff that was being put out by Jay-Z and others of that era. And I used to think that Jay-Z was an amazing artist, a truly gifted lyricist. He still is. That's why he's been chosen as their number one asset. That's why he's the one that's up there at the very top of the tree, simply because he's got that talent and they've realised how he can be put to work for them. So it was very difficult for me to come to terms with the fact that he was manipulated, the fact that he was a stooge, and the fact that his music was being used for mind control purposes. And since I've been doing work into the Beatles and this whole Paul McCartney thing, I've met a number of original generation Beatles fans who remember that group from the 60s. And they have a lot of nostalgic memories invested in the Beatles as they remember them. And so when you try and suggest to an original Beatles fan that the hidden hand was at place with that group and that all may not be as it seems and that they were a product of the Tavistock Institute and all the rest of it, you get a lot of resistance and a lot of denial because people, that's their generation, that's the soundtrack of their youth, it's special to them and they do not want to think of it as being corrupted in any way. So I do get it because the whole Jay-Z thing was a problem for me, which I've had to overcome. But the evidence is there, and the truth is the truth. And I've had to come to terms with the way hip-hop music is being used. The evidence is there in terms of the music that you listen to. I'm putting it out there. There's a number of other researchers putting it out there in terms of what the music is being used for. It's your choice, of course, entirely what you do with that information. That's the gift of free will. But there is alternative music available if you choose to discard that stuff and look for some of the others. As I've said, you don't hear it on the radio, you don't hear it in clubs because they don't want you listening to it. But it is out there and it can be found. So there are alternative choices to be made if you choose to, but it is each individual's free will choice as to whether they continue to listen to that stuff or not. You know, it works for some, doesn't work for others. That's pretty much it.
Great. So we have about 5 minutes left, and there are loads of you who want to ask questions. Fantastic. So I'm just going to leave this guy.
We'll do one more, yeah?
Yeah, this guy has been waiting for since the beginning.
Hey. Yeah.
Hi.
So lately, the last couple of months, there's been a lot of videos online about predictive programming, talking about this month, number 23, and all this talk about a possible nuclear attack.
Yeah, the world's going to blow up in, 4 days?
Yeah, no, but also that it's might be the birth of the New World Order with some kind of event because of the 7-year thing with the Shemitah and all that stuff. Like 9/11 was on the Shemitah and all that. Then also the CERN machine, there's a lot of shit going on about the CERN turning on full power at the 23rd. And of course the Pope goes to Obama and they got some stuff going on there. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I've heard all about it. I've heard the theories that something big is about to go down on the 23rd of this month, which is this coming Wednesday, I think. CERN is going into overdrive, as you say. There have been rumours of an asteroid or meteor that's going to strike the Earth. We've seen all this stuff before, to be honest. We get these scare stories every now and again. We had it with the Millennium Bug in the dawn of 2000, and then something big was going to go down on 2012, 21st of December 2012. I think it serves a purpose every now and again for there to be a bit of fear-mongering going on amongst the alternative community, if you like, to have people in anticipation of something catastrophic that may be about to happen. I think it's all part of keeping people in a low vibrational fear-based state, and in most cases these dates come and go without incident. I hope that will be the case with the 23rd, and I think it will. And I think it's more of what I mentioned about predictive programming elements are sometimes used to reinforce a cover story or something completely bogus, something which didn't even happen. It was just a hoax using actors. It doesn't matter that it wasn't genuine, it wasn't real. The idea is to gain that familiarity with it in the public subconscious and to get people fearful of it. And I think that might be what's going on here. There's been a lot of talk about what may or may not happen on the 23rd. There's a lot of fear and anxiety and stress as a result of it, and that serves a purpose. I think and I hope that Wednesday is going to come and go without incident. But I guess we don't have to wait long, do we? We'll soon know.
Thank you. Great. We have one last question, I'm afraid. This is the last question. I think this guy has as well. Lots of people are waiting, and it's great you're keen, but this is the last question.
Thank you very, very much. The hip-hop movement and culture is a thing that's very dear to my heart, so I'm very glad I got to talk to you about this subject, because there's also, just for the ones of you who wants to research, there's a BET, Black Entertainment television/MTV producer with some videos on YouTube. Pretty interesting. It seems like he's an insider. He seems pretty legit. And regarding everything that's been said right now, I have so much to say, but I want to quote Jim Morrison: "Whoever controls the media controls the mind," and that is very, very regarding this entire lecture and the comments and stuff. And I want to say that modern hip hop is not hip hop; it's hip hop, and that KRS-One, one of my favorite rappers, who talked about the New World Order all the way back in '85 or something, he also says hip is the knowledge, hop is the movement. That says it all, because knowledge today in rap music, you don't see that at all. It's just bitches, cars, titties, ass, bigger asses, all that bullshit. And the young kids,
totally,
no disrespect, young lady, the young kids are just eating it up because it's what's in and it's what's hot and whatever. And I think it's so sad to see people thinking that that is rap music, because we have the pioneers, Dead Press, and all those guys who listened to, who talked about Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and the real people who should be talked about. But now, Lil Wayne, he talks about nothing relevant, nothing interesting, nothing worth knowing.
Hoes and Satan, mainly.
Sorry?
He talks about hoes and Satan, mainly.
Exactly, and that's what they all do, more or less. And
yeah.
Thank you.
I see all that totally. I'll be real quick because I know we're going to finish. But there is a researcher that I recently came across by the name of Black Dot, and he put a book out 10 years ago called Hip Hop Decoded, and he's talking about the metaphysical and spiritual components of hip hop. And he's talking about the fact that when hip hop culture was birthed in the Bronx in 1973, it was reawakening and evoking these spiritual elements within black people that had travelled with them from the African continent over to the States. And there are 5 elements to hip-hop culture, as I'm sure you know. You've got the rapping, then you've got the breaking or b-boying, the dancing, you've got the graffiti art, and you've got the turntablism. And then you've got knowledge of self, which is said to be the 5th element of it. And Black Dot says that each of these components of hip-hop has a spiritual component that it corresponds to, and it goes back to ancient African civilizations. On one level, you've got the 4 elements which are representative of the 4 elements in nature: earth, air, fire, water, and then knowledge of self as spirit. And then you've got the fact that rapping is evoking the oracle, the storyteller in ancient African traditions. The turntablism, the rhythmic scratching, is evoking the drummer of those traditions. The b-boying is evoking the dances that took place, the tribal dances, and the graffiti art is hieroglyphics. And he's talking about the fact that hip-hop is a rebirth of these deep esoteric spiritual components. And I think he's absolutely right. And I think that would provide one of the reasons why there's been such a concerted agenda to debase and degrade and corrupt hip-hop. They want to take the spirituality out of it. They don't want particularly black people, being uplifted and inspired by this art form. They just want it toxic and grounded in absolute base consciousness. And we can see that in the sort of lyrics and the sort of artists and the sort of agenda that we've now got. That's the way it seems to me. Thanks for listening.